Welcome to the Low Carb Conferences podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff Gerber, and today we have two special guests, Megan Ramos from Toronto originally, now living in San Francisco, and Nadia Pataguana, currently living in Lisbon, Portugal. They've both been supporters of our event and have spoken at the conference. Their connection is that of the intensive dietary management program and the fasting methods where they work together with Dr. Jason Fung. So I'd like to introduce both of them to you. Megan, how's it going today?
It's going well, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's so nice to have you. And hello to Nadia. How are you doing?
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Megan. Doing great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you both. And Nadia is in Portugal, and we had to schedule and reschedule to get this thing happening. But here we are. So a little bit about Megan. Megan is a clinical educator and expert on therapeutic fasting and low-carb diets, having guided more than 14,000 people worldwide. She is the co-author of the New York Times bestseller book, Life in the Fasting Lane. And I happen to have a copy of that one right here. That's a great book, Megan.
Thank you.
And Nadia. Nadia is a naturopathic doctor and health consultant with the fasting method, also an author of the PCOS Plan. And Nadia, I happen to have a copy of that book here as well.
You're organized.
I try. So Nadia has almost 20 years of clinical experience with a focus on metabolic and reproductive health. Nadia also has quite an international flair. She was born in Mozambique, was raised in Canada, and now is living in Lisbon, Portugal. So I wonder if each of you can share a little bit more about your background, your professional and personal interests. And how about we have Megan, you go first.
Sure. I've always been really keen in preventative medicine. That's how I got into medical research in the first place. But I started in nephrology, which is a study of kidney disease. And that's how I met Dr. Jason Fung. He's a kidney specialist. And a lot of the research that we worked on at that clinic focused on lifestyle interventions to slow down the progression of kidney disease. But all of our lifestyle interventions were failing patients terribly. And I watch the clinic go from very few patients on dialysis to tens of thousands of patients on dialysis every week. And there is a huge relationship with that increase in patients requiring dialysis and the development of type 2 diabetes and the obesity epidemic. So it was just really heartbreaking. I got into medical research to help patients and prevent disease and get better. And, that's what Jason did as a doctor. He wanted to help people. And instead, we were just watching people decline. Kind of in a parallel approach or coincidence, being really frustrated at work, I also developed a lot of metabolic illnesses myself, just trying to follow all of the guidelines. I became diabetic. I had PCOS. I had fatty liver disease, and I was gaining weight despite following the Canadian food pyramid, working with a fancy dietitian, working with a personal trainer. And I just was terrified for my own health, for the health of our patients, but for my own health. And Jason had a recent discussion at the time of my diagnosis with a friend who had fasted for spiritual reasons, but saw improvements in her health. And this led him to reflect on our patients in Toronto. So Toronto is the most culturally diverse city in the world. And it was not uncommon for 10, 15% of our patients to fast every year for Ramadan, or fast at various points throughout the year for religious reasons. And every time we had to decrease their medications, their blood sugars would improve, their blood pressures would improve. And then the period of fasting would end and we'd have to increase their medications again. And this never really set off any light bulbs. But for Jason that day, it set off some light bulbs. So I overheard him talking to some patients about it, and all the light bulbs in my head went off. And I thought, I've got to start fasting. This makes perfect sense. So I immediately started fasting. It inspired me to modify my eating days. I went on a low carbohydrate diet. And in 6 months, no diabetes, no PCOS, fatty liver, and I lost over 60 pounds. And we were then able to start working with some patients in the clinic Jason's gone on to have a very popular blog and many popular books. So we had a lot of interest from people really wanting to reverse type 2 diabetes from all over the world, which is how we founded the fasting method in our online program now.
Great, Megan. And if I understand, you started with Dr. Fung at a very early age. He took you on, he took you under his wing, and you really became an expert and learned by default and by working in the trenches, as they say.
Yes, I started at the clinic when I was 15. My father's good friend, he was the director of the program. His kids wanted to go to law school, and I wanted to go into medicine. So they traded kids for summer jobs. His kids went to work at my father's law firm. And that summer, there was a brand new young nephrologist, fresh out of his residency program. And the new nephrologist had to do some research projects to get themselves acquainted with the trenches of the program. So I started working with Jason then at the age of 15, and I just turned 38. So it's been a little while.
Wow. Well, congratulations. And I have to warn the audience, both Megan and Nadia are passionate about what they do. But my experience with Megan is that she's so passionate that when she gets up on stage, she often goes over time, and we have to grab that hook and tell her time's up. But you can see the passion is just oozing out of her, and she can't get off until she gets every last word out. So good for you.
We will be on time in Denver in February. I promise you, Jeff.
Okay, well, both of you we're doing a dual presentation, and you get a little bit more time. So I'm sure you've gotten much better at it over the years. So yeah, so Nadia, let's hear from you.
Well, I had it pretty easy because by the time I joined these guys, they had a full house in a full room of files waiting for me to see patients. But before that, as you said earlier, Jeff, and I was joking with you earlier today that I did a presentation at one of your conferences, and I introduced myself as, who is this Canadian-raised, Portuguese-speaking, African-born person? But then you thought that was a great way to introduce myself here too. So that's all actually pretty relevant, because I've not only lived in 3 different countries and continents, but I've worked now in 3 different countries and continents. And that's been part of my experience. I actually went to school in Canada. I was raised in Canada. I went to the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, but I actually didn't practice in Canada. So as soon as I graduated, I had this wonderful dream of going back to my home country, to Mozambique, which at the time was considered by the WHO the poorest country in the world with the highest rates of malnutrition. And so my dream when I finished college was to go back to Mozambique and work in nutrition, but I wanted to work in the rural areas with mothers and babies. And I thought that was going to be possible for me to do, except that when I went back to Mozambique, I realized that it was not available to me whatsoever for a variety of reasons, very complicated politics. And in my search, in my fight to doing that, I actually had a meeting with the Minister of Health at the time. And it was the Minister of Health at the time in Mozambique. And I guess this was, 2007, I think, whenever that was. 2004. No, 2004. That's right. 2004 is when I moved to Mozambique and started working. He said to me, well, you would be really doing us a great favor if you opened up a clinic here in the city, in the capital, and focused on weight loss. And I thought, what? Like, how does that make any sense? How am I going to Mozambique to help people lose weight when I thought I was coming here to help malnourished babies and mummies? And he said, well, you have no idea. There's an epidemic of obesity and diabetes. And he was right. Very reluctantly, I ended up opening a clinic for something that I did not want to do, for something that I was not trained to do. And I had to learn. And I lived in Mozambique for 10 years. I was very lucky because I was the only person. There was no nutritionist at the time. There was absolutely no one seeing people. And there was an overwhelming number of people that needed help with metabolic syndrome. So I opened up my clinic because it's such a tight-knit community. Very quickly, I had doctors referring to me, and I developed a reputation very quickly because I was young and eager to work and learn. And I didn't have any guidelines that I had to follow, right? I didn't have anyone telling me what to do or what was the right diet or not. So I just focused on a real food diet right away. I took some of the teachings that I learned from the naturopathic college, and I thought, of course I did research on what the conventional diet for weight loss was, but it just didn't make sense to me. The whole low calorie, eat less, move more business. It didn't make sense. I didn't see, people were very unhappy. So we started trying different things. So real food was the way to go. A lot of detoxes, as they were called at the time, right? Elimination diets. And over time, something quite interesting started to happen. Of course, I started to find out more about sort of out of the box, less conventional methods like low carb. But something quite interesting started to happen is that I developed a reputation for getting women pregnant. And that became a big joke, right? So all of a sudden people were coming to me, of course, for weight loss. And because I was so busy and I was the only person doing this, it was very easy to sort of have, case studies, let's say. So a lot of women that were coming to me to lose weight were coming back 3 months later with their husbands reporting that they were pregnant and they had tried to conceive in their 20s and 30s and were never able to. And how come now they were in their 40s and pregnant? And this became sort of, be careful, don't go to Dr. Nadia unless you want to get pregnant. And that was a thing. And so over time, like Megan, it became a passion, but also very personal, because at some point in my own personal journey, I started to struggle with infertility. And so when I struggled with infertility, I started to sort of connect the dots. And I worked with a lot of medical doctors, gynecologists, cardiologists. I mean, it was a really nice complementary setting that I was in, me being the only person in Mozambique that was working on diet with all of these doctors. I got some really good insight. And so eventually we all sort of figured out that the reason why all these ladies were getting pregnant was because they had insulin resistance, and the type of diets that I was giving people were helping to reverse insulin resistance. And then when I struggled with infertility, we were trying to figure out, okay, how come I was struggling, but I was thin, right? And then the whole PCOS thing came in. Then I was finally diagnosed with PCOS, even though I was the thin, lean type of PCOS patients. And so anyway, that's how this whole story for me came together. That sort of from that moment on, nothing else made sense except working with people with metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance and fertility. And then after 10 years, my family, my husband and I decided to move back to Canada. At that point, we were pregnant with our second child. And because I had been researching this, of course, I knew of Megan and Jason, and I started to stalk them. And after enough stalking, they finally agreed, okay, fine, we'll let her come and work with us. She seems all right. And as I said, I came in and Megan had this huge office piled up to the top with files. She was completely overwhelmed, and I had the clinical experience, and I was very eager to sit with her for 2 whole months as I shadowed her and Dr. Fung, and then eventually started seeing patients in groups myself. And then, as Megan said, eventually our entire program went online. So I decided to move to Portugal with my family. Mm-hmm. And I continue to work for the fasting method. Now it's been almost 7 years. And here we are.
Oh, yeah. Wow. That's great, Nadia. So, truly a fantastic international experience, and what great stories about PCOS. I was recently talking to the administrator of the Banting group in South Africa, and she was explaining to me that PCOS and infertility is a big part of their group, and the women show pictures of their children, the success of changing diet, addressing PCOS and insulin resistance. And I wonder if in Mozambique, so infertility is socially unacceptable. And so the women are looked down upon for being infertile. Isn't that sad?
Yeah, it is. Actually, today I was just talking to somebody because to this day, I still get a lot of my clients from Moses. So because our program is online, I get to work with people all over the world, but I still have this reputation in Mozambique. So to this day, I still get women join our program, and we have testimonials of my patients, of my clients from Mozambique, even recent sort of miracle babies. I already know when a woman from Mozambique reaches out to me and she says, oh, weight and high blood pressure, and even if she doesn't tell me, I'm like, she's got a 12-year-old child. Just recently this happened, and then within 3 months she's pregnant, and she finally tells me, I've been trying to conceive for 11 years after my first child was born. And so we have all of these stories. So it's really wonderful. And it's really sad, actually, that this is not more talked about, and that it is that way.
Yes. So we have success stories in our office as well. And so there's a lot more to this than just helping people lose weight. And the other comment I was going to say is that we have all these food deserts around the world where people have access to food, but they're empty calories. And so the individuals, as I understand, they're malnourished and yet overweight. And I think that's what you were speaking of. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is what's going on in Mozambique, and definitely South Africa. I actually know the people that you're talking about. That's how I met Jason Fung, actually. So once I stalked Megan and Jason and they didn't want to have anything to do with me, I used my connections with the Banting and the Noakes people, and that's how I got introduced.
Yeah. Well, I thought there might be a connection. So, I wish you'll probably get into PCOS a little bit when you come to the conference in February. But of course, you guys are going to cover the topic of fasting and the various nuances. And so I have a million questions. Usually we go about 45 minutes. So, I'm just going to throw these out and let you guys handle this. And so the first is, to talk, as you already have, regarding fasting, but some of the different methods and approaches and what people might misunderstand.
Sure. So I think what a big focus of our talk in February is the difference between time-restricted eating and therapeutic fasting protocols. So time-restricted eating means every day you are doing some fasting followed by a restricted period of eating. Most people refer to it as an eating window. So when you're going through the checkouts at your local supermarket or pharmacy, you'll see on the cover of magazines, the fasting diet, 18-6 or 16-8 or the 24. And these are popular terms you'll see splashed everywhere. And these are time-restricted eating protocols. So the most common ones you read about are the 16-8 or the 18-6. Which means every day you fast for 16 to 18 hours and you permit yourself an eating window of 6 to 8 hours. Most people in North America that we work with do this by skipping breakfast. Most breakfast foods are highly processed. A lot of the diabetics note that they have elevated blood sugar levels in the morning. So why eat and add fuel to the fire? So they'll wake up, they'll have their cup of coffee or their cup of tea, maybe a cup of broth, and they will not consume any food until lunchtime. And that will vary between 16 and 18 hours. And then they'll eat lunch and dinner within a 6 to 8 hour window. And this is, in essence, what time-restricted eating is. It's a practice that's typically done daily. And when someone's looking to lose that freshman 15 that they didn't quite lose after entering the workforce, or if they've just got some mild metabolic markers that are off, this is often an effective strategy at remedying those conditions and losing a little bit of weight. But unfortunately, especially in North America, we see this huge epidemic of metabolic syndrome, the type 2 diabetes, the obesity in the midsection, high blood pressure. And in these instances, these individuals have what's called insulin resistance. They've got this toxic level of insulin in their body, and it's caused quite a bit of disease. And what we tend to do to help remedy the situation is focus on therapeutic fasting protocols. And we look at doing fasts that range anywhere from about 24 hours to 48 hours, 2 to 3 times a week for a period of time. Through all of our experience, we found that there's a lot of conditions that we can treat within about 6 months of applying this approach. Those conditions would be type 2 diabetes. Most individuals will be off of all of their medications. And I'm sharing that Jason and I had patients who are on insulin for over 34 years, that within 6 months were off of insulin, and now 10 years later, still don't need it anymore. So type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, they say there's no cure. In 6 months, we can eradicate non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. PCOS, I tell everyone, Nadia will make you pregnant in 3 months. That doesn't even take the full 6 months to rectify. So a lot of these metabolic conditions we can treat within 6 months. So we term these more intensive fasting protocols as therapeutic ones, because we want people to treat it like a therapy, that they commit to showing up for their treatments 2 to 3 times a week to reverse these insulin-related conditions. So that's how time-restricted eating and these therapeutic protocols differ. When someone reaches that optimal metabolic health, at the end of 6 months of doing the therapeutic protocols, then we encourage them to go on time-restricted eating protocols to maintain their good health and to continue to optimize it further.
Great. Well, Nadia, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that we'll as Megan said, this is exactly what we want to focus on. This is what our talk is going to be on. I think it's really important that people fully understand what TRE, time restricted eating, is and what it stands for. I joke that it's the Beyonce of the show. It's the epitome of intermittent fasting. So in order for people to actually get to a point where they can do therapeutic fasting successfully, where they can actually benefit from the therapy of it, the healing effects of extended fasting, it's really important to understand what TRE is and how to do it properly. And then, as Megan said, even for long-term success, for sustainability, it's important that we understand right from the get-go how important TRE is, time-restricted eating. So we'll talk more about that, I think.
Yeah, great. So, fasting, the word fasting is built into the whole model of what you do. But for myself, I don't particularly like that word, because I think it invokes the idea that you're depriving the individual of something. And I mean, they're just words. What I love to discuss with my patients, and again, I'm big fans of yours, is that concept of mindfulness, that if you're hungry, eat. If you're not hungry, don't eat, and skip a meal. And again, it's just words, but that's kind of the terminology that resonates with me. And this is what I share with patients, because I don't want them to feel that they're depriving themselves of anything. What are your thoughts?
I think both Megan and I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I think that perspective is everything, right? And we work with lots of wonderful people, but one of the people that we work with is Dr. Terry Lance, who's a behavioral psychologist, and she's a big part of our program. She's now a big part of our own podcast. She's one of our co-hosts. I think, Jeff, that it would make sense to me that you would say that. And in a healthy conversation, we would be able to discuss this, if we had more time, which, like you already said, we're going to try to get to a lot of things today. If we had more time, I would love to get more in depth into this, but it really is about perspective. Keep in mind that we are now in a world where the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry dictates so much of what we think and how we see things, right? Because of the way that we are bombarded with messages and information. I agree with you that words are powerful. But like Megan, I come from a country where 50% of the people in Mozambique are Muslim. So fasting is not a bad word where I come from. And so the majority of people that we actually deal with nowadays are having to deal with that, right? Is this a bad thing or not? It's actually something that most people, most cultures, most religions are actually maybe less familiar with in the last few years, but we have to remember that we as a human species have been around forever. And so fasting has actually been a part of people's dictionaries, language since always. So yes, I understand that we are now in a society where everything feels like deprivation because we've been told that we should eat every 3 hours. We've been told that we should have food freedom, but food freedom, that I mean, I'm bringing up all these words that would require an entire podcast, right, Jeff? But food freedom actually means feeling like you have the control to choose what you eat, how much you eat, when you eat. And if you're eating junk food all the time, you feel zero food freedom. You feel like you're completely controlled by the food, as opposed to, and you know, because we've worked with, as you said, Megan has worked with over 14,000 patients. We know that people's mindset changes because their hormones change, right? We're talking about insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia, people that are sick with metabolic syndrome. So once you start to heal that and fix that, everything changes. People cry and become very emotional because they actually feel this food freedom for the first time in their entire lives. They don't feel deprived. I think they go into it because of the power of words, like you say, thinking, oh, low carb, that's gonna be deprivation. Fasting, I'm gonna feel deprived, but they actually feel the complete opposite of that. And again, I am also very passionate. I could go on and on about this forever, but I think this is a great topic that you're bringing up. It's definitely one that's worth talking about.
Good. Well, I know Megan, do you want to say something briefly, Megan?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of negative stuff associated sometimes too with eating as a reward or as comfort. One of our community members, I just love this, at the beginning of COVID, he said that he rephrased these terms as healing and rebuilding. So on his fasting days, he was not fasting, he was healing. And he wrote a list of all of the great things that he was healing: his high morning blood sugar levels, his inflammation, his IBS. And on his eating days, he was rebuilding. He wasn't rewarding himself with pastries or desserts or comforting himself, because of the lockdown situation. He was eating good fats to generate good hormones and to build healthy cells, and feeding himself good protein. And I just love that. I think it was an incredible mindset tip to help people who are new to fasting just sort of reframe what it is as we start to evolve our journey with fasting and with eating differently.
Well, excellent. Another aspect is that I often hesitate to take people and dive right into, TRE or therapeutic fasting. So what I like to do is to start out slow and just discuss macronutrients. Let's start with a low carb diet, and then we can get into this aspect of fasting or skipping meals, as opposed to you just say dive into it. The question is it too extreme?
I think it just depends on the individual and their experience with fasting. I wanted to dive into it myself and crashed horribly, and had to start off with just not snacking. And, in 6 months, I achieved some great results. So we really try to work with individuals where they are at. And if someone is brand new to fasting and hesitant about it, but has been encouraged to try it by their doctors. I mean, we just go back to the basics, our grandparents, great-grandparents' generation, and cut out the snacking. Don't eat before dinner to spoil our appetite. Make sure you're feeling satiated comfortably, so at dinner, so you're not wanting to snack before bed. And just going back to those 3 meals a day, and then letting it happen organically from there. So we always liken fasting to building a muscle. And some people have stronger muscles, and some people's muscles need more conditioning before they can start lifting heavier weights. So for Nadia and I, when we've got patients who've participated in Ramadan every year, for 30 years, we can start off with a more therapeutic, aggressive approach versus someone like me who couldn't start off that way when I was encouraged to eat every 2 hours of the day from the time I was born, till developing diabetes. So it's really about meeting the patient where they're at.
Great.
I think if I can cut in there, Jeff, you said it. I think I completely agree with you, and this is an important aspect of the right balance between eating and fasting, but also what we eat, right? So we as well encourage, even though we're a fasting program, so we talk a lot more about fasting, we're very food inclusive, but what you eat is ultimately going to also determine how easy it is for people to fast, right? So again, looking at helping people to choose high nutrient dense foods and to choose real foods. But there's, a couple of things here. I think Megan is totally right. I am not extreme in any way in my approach with my clients. And most of the time we start people off with TRE, time restricted eating. So full meals, no snacking. And that's going to be a big part of our talk when we see you in February. It's the idea that once people have better control and they focus on full meals, not snacking, then with a proper support, they can go into the therapeutic aspect, the healing therapeutic fasts. And again, another big topic, we could probably have a whole podcast about this, but this is a therapeutic and healing approach to manage serious diseases, right? That we're talking about here. And the conventional approach right now is, and I talk about this all the time, our patients tell us this all the time, my doctor told me to gain 20 pounds so that I can have bariatric surgery. So when people come at us and say, somebody said this to me yesterday, if somebody comes at me and says, well, fasting, that seems so extreme. Fasting is something that's been around forever, and we can all do it. We all do it. We all fast while we sleep, right? We all have the ability to do it. If we understand the science behind it, we can all identify the obvious benefits. So it's so funny that we're just in this society right now where bariatric surgery is considered not extreme and conventional, yet fasting, which is something that is actually quite gentle on the body, and healing and therapeutic is seen as extreme. So again, this requires a conversation.
Yeah. So stories like that infuriate me. That's just ridiculous. And I was about to say that, look, time restricted eating is nothing extreme. So it's, the basics are, like you said, you eat 3 meals a day and you don't snack in between. And then if you're doing okay, you skip one or 2 meals a day. Now, it works for some people it doesn't work. So, like you said, everyone's different. And in terms of people being different, we see patients, of course, 2/3 of the population have a problem with insulin resistance, but there's another third, and in particular, women that are insulin sensitive. And so the question is, what's your approach to those individuals, and do you screen for that?
Well, Nadia, I'll let you.
No. I was going to say we both work with women quite a bit. So the great majority of our program is actually women. I'll let Megan answer that, but for sure, I mean, this is something. Most people that come to our program are not the insulin sensitive part of that group, right? But they're more and more starting to come because they're becoming knowledgeable and they're becoming. They're looking at longevity and prevention. So for sure.
I have a group of young women that I work with in their late 20s. Their mothers were all patients or clients of ours, and they don't want to end up going down the same road as their mothers. So they've not lost that freshman 10 or 15, but they're not overweight. Really, they have excellent biomarkers, a great glucose response. Their insulin levels aren't high. They would just like to maybe lose that 10 pounds and maintain their good health. So they're not having to do these more intensive and therapeutic things down the road. And it's fabulous working with them. We focus a lot on meal timing, and we focus a lot on nutrient density foods and making sure that they're supporting their thyroids, their adrenal glands, their reproductive function. And it's just been so incredible to watch the relationship with food transform to food, is really there to provide them with nutrients. It's not necessarily a comfort food, but it's still something fun that they can enjoy. And giving them the power of, time restricted eating protocols, they feel so much more confident that they're going to be able to control their health as well as their waistlines as they get older. So that's generally the approach that I take with this healthy population. That's great. Let's maintain that good health. Let's make sure you're on a diet that works very well for your physiology, that you're getting in all of the nutrient support that you need. And we're optimizing things like your thyroid function, like your sex hormones, and then great, we don't ever have to worry about doing this therapeutic stuff later on down the road, because you'll be able to maintain that great insulin sensitivity.
Yes, and I just should add that these are insulin sensitive women that need to lose weight. And I've found that the same approach actually works with them, and time restricted eating and even therapeutic fasting, the macronutrients might change a little bit. I think in those individuals, you have to consider, I hate to use the word calories or the quantity of food, but I think why fasting works is at the end of the day, when you count up your calories, people end up eating less instead of just grazing all day long. And of course, there's more to it, and we'll discuss that in a minute. But I just wanted to throw in that these approaches do work for the insulin sensitive individuals.
And because we work so much with women, I had a patient today, actually, a client today, who was insulin sensitive her whole life. And then just as she was going through menopause, of course, she lost that hormonal advantage. And so, working with that transition. But like Megan said, we're at this point are seeing a lot of younger women, because insulin resistance, as we all know, is on a spectrum, right? You can go up that spectrum, and luckily you can go down that spectrum. So they're seeing their mothers, usually, this is how we're getting all of these younger referrals most of the time. They're seeing their mothers way up there on that spectrum. The patient that I had today, the client that I had today, it was that exact example. It was, my mother's diabetic and insulin dependent. I had gestational diabetes. She's seeing herself go up that spectrum, and she's wondering, how do I avoid that? How do I prevent that?
Yeah.
And luckily we have that experience.
Yeah. So in a lot of individuals, it's insulin resistance waiting to happen. It may not look that way initially. Yeah. So look, the reason that fasting works is because it puts the body in a state where it can burn its own energy. And what I wanted to bring up as the next topic is to talk about starvation mode. And so what is the difference between fasting and starvation?
Jason always describes it as a voluntary versus involuntary thing, first and foremost. When you're fasting, you're electing to do so, you're dictating the time period, when your next meal's coming, and you can have it at any point in time. The starvation's involuntary. You don't know when your next meal is going to come, how long it's going to be. So that's usually how he chooses to define it when he does his presentations. There's also, nutrient considerations as well. So in North America right now, there's 2/3 of the population with insulin issues. We struggle with this combination of people are exceptionally overnourished in the sense they have a ton of body fat, but they're sort of undernourished in the sense that the food that they've eaten that's generated all of this body fat's not very nutritious. So we've got things like B12 deficiencies, across the board, and people are struggling with methylation status and problems due to that, due to our nutrient void diets. In starvation, though, there's malnutrition across the board. So you don't have those extra fat stores, and you don't have those nutrients because your diet's been completely devoid of everything. So they're very different scenarios. Jason always uses this example to debunk the myth of fasting burning muscle. And I think it's a good one that helps kind of separate the two. So his example is when you're at a cabin in the woods in the dead of winter and you want to create a fire because it's getting chilly. If you have excess body weight, what are you going, if you have, let me recircle. So you're in this cabin, you want to create a fire. You've got a coffee table that you could saw up and throw in the fire, or you've got 100 logs of wood already chopped up on the porch. Now, if you've got this excess wood, you're going to use that to create a fire. It would be very, very silly to cut up that coffee table when you've got all of this wood. Coffee tables are expensive. They're a couple $1,000s now nowadays, right? And they serve multiple functions. So why would you do that when you've got all of this firewood that's already prepared? So he likens this to a body with excess body fat, excess fuel stores. Why would we attack the muscles and the proteins in those muscles when we've got all of this fat for fuel that's readily available? Why would we destroy what is functional? We're going to use the fat stores to create the fire, to generate the fuel. But when individuals are in the starvation state, they don't have 100 logs of fuel sitting on their porch. They've got to attack the furniture, and the furniture integrity is not going to be very good because of the nutrient deficiency. So there's a big difference between the individual that we're trying to fast to versus the individual who's struggling in a starvation state. Nadia, I'm not sure if you want to, oh, sorry.
I did want to add something, actually. I mean, I can see how people would confuse fasting and starving, right? I can see it from an outside perspective. Once you've been doing this for 10, 20 years, Jeff, probably you as well, physiologically, if you have the opportunity to look at patients clinically, you know, their lab markers, just how people feel in general, it's unfortunate that we don't have enough clinical studies and research to show this. And often when people are talking about fasting, they're using studies that were done on people that were in starvation mode and not people that were fasting, and they're using that as their evidence against fasting. And that really is upsetting to us, right? When we see people talk about fasting and they're using, you know, people that have gone through terrible circumstances like the Holocaust, or they were in starvation mode because of diseases or illnesses. It's a completely different state than what we see in our patients. Like Megan says, first of all, these are people that have an immense amount of body fat stored, ready to be used. And once you get people, as you probably see, Jeff, once you get people in a low carb ketogenic state, right, they have this immense amount of fuel. It's the same thing, of course, that we see with our patients when they're in a fasted state. They have this immense amount of fuel. So it's like, if I can make it simple for people to understand, they're in this state. It's almost like they're an all-you-can-eat fat buffet all the time. It's very different than being in starvation mode. And I can tell you how sometimes people that are fasting place themselves in starvation mode unknowingly. And that's by they think they're fasting, or they're put themselves in these clinics that are fasting people, but in fact, they're being given juicing or, you know, these tiny little small, you know, low calorie things along the way. They're putting themselves in starvation mode. Whereas when they're actually fasting, their body switches into fat burning mode, and they have, this is why people tell you, you know, brain fog is gone, all this energy, you know, they exercise better. It's very, very different to abstain for food for periods of time when you've eaten very well before and you eat very well after, nutrient dense, you know, appropriate caloric foods, than to be in this low calorie starvation mode during periods of war, or during these periods of, you know, unfortunate, you know, these fasting clinics where people are put in these starvation diets for periods of time and told that they are fasting. These are two completely different states. If you go without eating, or if you go into a strict low carb state, as you know, you go into this ketogenic fat burning high energy state. It's very, very different than being in this very low calorie starvation mode. Not comparable. It sounds like it's the same, but it's physiologically totally different.
Yes. Excellent comments. So, the medical term is a healthy catabolic state. So catabolism talks about burning your own energy. And so in this case, the goal is to burn body fat while maintaining muscle mass. And so just to summarize, the nutrients are important and also the timing. So I like to explain it that you could eat 1,000 calories, say, in 2 meals versus eating 1,000 calories all throughout the day as it trickles in. And if you have the calories trickling in all day long, you don't get into this healthy catabolic state. It's this idea of eating less frequently and extending the period when you don't eat that gives you this healthy catabolic state. Okay, you're both shaking your head, so we're going to move on. So sustainability. So that's the next question I have. What are your comments about that?
I think most people can't imagine going back to a time where they were hungry all day long, let alone being able to eat every hour, every 2 hours. Prior to moving, my husband and I went out to dinner in Toronto, and it was our first meal that day. Actually, it was an early dinner, and he was looking around, and the people next to us, they had ordered like a 3-4 course meal. And he said to me, "Can you imagine that's how we used to eat? We would wake up, we would have breakfast, we'd have a snack going to work, we'd have lunch, we'd have an afternoon snack with our afternoon coffee. We'd get home from work and have a snack, and we'd come out to a dinner like this and we'd eat 4 courses. And then we would probably have a snack after bed." Can you ever imagine going back to that? And I just physically wouldn't be able to do it. It's not a psychological thing. I enjoy eating. I have a fabulous relationship with food. But physically, I just couldn't do it anymore. And this is what we hear from people who are really able to tackle their insulin issues. The appetite isn't turned on 24/7 anymore. They just can't imagine doing it. They eat a couple times a day. They feel good, and their life's not dictated by their hormones and their hunger anymore from the imbalances that exist. So we see it being quite sustainable. I mean, I don't expect anyone to do therapeutic fasting for the rest of their lifespans. We treat that like a therapeutic approach to be done in a certain amount of time. But when it comes to time-restricted eating, I think that the majority of people we work with can't ever imagine going back. And I know from my own personal experience, I can't either.
I think we've come full circle, right? We're going right back to the conversation that it also depends on you've healed this hormonal syndrome, right? The metabolic syndrome. So you're not in this state of constantly feeling controlled by food and constantly looking for food. I call it the insulin beast. We've tamed the insulin beast. So you eat, you feel satiated, you walk away. It's food freedom. And you speak to any one of us, you guys included, because people that are eating more whole foods and low carb, they don't feel hungry all the time. And so it's we come full circle because it's a lifestyle change, as Megan said, and we'll talk about this in February. The idea is not that you do therapeutic fasting for the rest of your life. It's a therapy. It's a healing protocol. It should be as swift as possible. Hopefully with the right guidance, you get that part of the journey out of the way. And, I didn't say this before, but it's funny, again, as people, I think this has a lot to do with our society and the information we're inundated with, but we realize that we need rules for everything, right? We need driving rules. We can't just go out there, get a car and just go and drive however you want. You got to follow certain rules. We have rules, for children. Children, we know, do better when they have proper guidelines and discipline. We do better when we have proper guidelines and discipline when it comes to food as well. People do feel better when they actually feel like, oh, this is what it feels like to eat and feel satiated. So I created a lot of rules for myself when I started. I'm a big fan of rules. I know other people are not, but again, it's this idea that when it comes to food, there should be no rules. There should be a free for all. That does not work. It doesn't work in society. It doesn't work with driving. It doesn't work with children. It does not work for your health either. So I'm actually glad that once you establish these rules and you go through the therapeutic approach, whichever one that may be, if you're less insulin sensitive, maybe you just need to do some TRE to begin with. And then your maintenance plan is this, you continue on with TRE. If you're very insulin resistant and you have a lot of expressions of metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance, then yes, we'll do some therapeutic fasting, and you will get to the point where eating full meals a couple of times a day actually feels wonderful. And like Megan said, why would you want to go back to feeling horrible? That's why you came to look for us in the first place, right?
Yeah. Well, look, we're 3 examples, plus we have tens of thousands of patients to show that long-term it can indeed work. And I always find it interesting. And some of the patients that do it long-term, not as much, but people will brag about not eating. And I think that's really funny, but other people don't quite get it. And so these people come in, they want to give it a test. And, I'm going to try to fast and I didn't eat, and they brag, and it's kind of like a 30-day thing. And, it's not a long-term approach that they're looking for. But on the other side, we have individuals that and they've sustained for quite some time where they'll do time restricted eating, and then once a week they'll do a 24-48 hour. Once a month they might even do a 3 or 4 day. I have some patients and they've sustained that type of approach. Do you have patients that even go beyond 48, 72 hours?
Yes, all of the time. A lot of people are very keen on trying to do it after hearing results or seeing results from friends or family members. So in general, we try to discourage people from doing it on a weekly basis. But, once every 1 to 2 months, if they're in their weight loss journey and they want to incorporate something like a 5 or a 7-day fast, just to help keep the ball rolling on their progress, is something that we've definitely supported. And we have had a handful of individuals wanting to do something more intense. So we have had individuals that wanted to fast for all of Lent, for example, for 40 days, or they wanted to do a 30-day fast. We were talking about some of these before the podcast today. I think, Jeff, you noted you had a patient who fasted for a while. Jason and I had one in the clinic who did 120 days of fasting. And, we encourage them in general, a bit more of a balanced approach. As I noted earlier, people are overnourished in the sense they've got plentiful body fat, but they've eaten a very nutrient voided diet for a very long time. So we've really encouraged real whole foods and kind of a balance between fasting and eating. But we do have these individuals who like to do these longer fasts occasionally. And if there's no medical reason why they shouldn't, we've often supported them in the clinic throughout their journey.
Yeah, so that leads us up to our last topic, just to finish and talk about my patient Damien, who gave me permission to discuss. And again, you are the fasting experts. I'm not necessarily an expert. I know a little bit about it. And so Damien is really an interesting story. And he found me because of, my interest in diet and nutrition. And Damien is certainly intense. I've told him he's crazy. And to make the story short, he went on a 6-month water fast. And he was maybe a month or 2 into it when he came to meet with me. And he's now 2 months out from that fast. And so he went 6 months and he lost 225 pounds, basically half his weight. He was up at 475. And he survived. And I begged him all along, please eat, please eat. I had spoken to Jason Fung early on, and my wife had commented, you should not see him because you don't endorse this. And my comment back to the patient was, well, or I should say the patient said to me, look, I'm going to do this with or without you. And I really felt obligated because I knew something about it. And so we followed the patient very carefully. We checked blood markers, magnesium, phosphorus. I wasn't that nuanced that I could measure his nitrogen balance, but the patient did okay. He did have side effects. And they were, he had GI distress along the way. Towards the end, he was getting dizzy. He had numbness of his feet and hands. And interestingly, he developed a normocytic anemia towards the end of it. And he was hungry at the end. And we were very careful to discuss refeeding with him, because that's where you can really get into trouble. And we basically refed very slowly with broth and fats. We added protein, then we added slowly carbohydrates, and he's doing great. And I asked to get his permission. I was going to talk anonymously, and he says, I want to let the world know about what I did. And it was certainly something special, and I'm glad he made it through. So what do you think about that?
It's a little bit more intensive than our general approach, but we have had patients approach Jason, Bong, and myself the same. We're going to do this with or without you. So we know something about the fasting. We monitor them. We do their blood work on a weekly basis. They need to report in regularly, come into the clinic for examinations every week, and it's turned out to be okay. Our one patient who did 120 days, he had gastric distress for a few times, but both short-lived in all circumstances, and was able to rehydrate properly. And it was about a 10-day approach to reintroducing solid foods at the end of that longer fast. We had one woman who was determined to do a 66-day fast. It was her 66th birthday was exactly 66 days from the start of the new year. And I knew she had a long-standing history of gout and high uric acid levels, especially with that level of dehydration that's capable of happening over such a long fast. And she had tried 7-day fasts in the past and had developed gout. So we had to devise a protocol for her, and she came in. She did blood work once a week. She came in twice a week, but she made her fast. And then it was about a week and a half long introduction for re-eating or refeeding for her, and she did very well. I think she lost over 30 pounds during that time and was able to maintain her weight loss. So these are more extreme circumstances that do, I think, require a lot of medical attention, and I think it's really important to make sure that they have that medical attention. Typically, we try to cap the fasts at about 10 days in extended fasting situations on a regular basis with working with individuals, though.
Nadia?
I have a bad reputation for not only getting women pregnant, but within our program, I have a bad reputation for not liking extended fasting. And it's not that I don't. I think there's a time and place for everything. Of course, we have the experience. I've had patients do the 40 days of Lent against my will. But like you said, they tell you they're going to do it anyway. In clinic, I had one guy come in and say, hey, I'm on the 36th day of a fast. Now what do I do? So I've been in situations like you guys where I've had to monitor somebody because they've put themselves in that situation. But so look, we know from experience, we know from even research, the longest fast out there was 300 and something days. So we know it's doable, but in my experience, you can get a lot better results with a lot less headaches and stomach aches if you do it properly. There's a better way to do it, I think. My guy, the clinic guy, 36 days, he ended up having a huge gout, flare. It's unnecessary in my opinion, but people are sometimes desperate, right? And so they will put themselves in these situations. Again, for a lot of people, it's like, hey, if I needed to do gastric surgery or do a 300-day fast, I'd rather do a 300-day fast. And I can understand why they're thinking that, but there still is a better way. There really is. It doesn't have to be one of these two extremes.
Well, look, I should say, Damien's put on about 20 pounds, and we'll see where that goes. And certainly, I would prefer not to see individuals that want to set records in terms of not eating, and I'm sure the two of you feel the same way. So we're really talking about doing something that is sustainable and long term. So look,
Absolutely.
So just to finish up, I always like to ask, what do you enjoy most about coming to these events in person? Megan, go first.
I love meeting the people who are showing up to take control of their health and changing their lives, and just hearing their stories. Even if they're early on in the journey, the transformation's so amazing. So for someone who got into medicine very young and just watched people's health decline for years, it just is always so uplifting to hear all success stories, no matter how grandiose, like coming off of insulin versus, dropping that first 5 pounds and feeling so empowered. So I just love the people. I love the learning. Low Carb Denver, there's always a variety of really great experts. It's one of my favorite conferences. It's one of the only conferences I attend when I'm not speaking, because life has just gotten so busy, but I just learned so much. And I think I'm on a fertility journey right now, and I so look forward to being able to thank everybody who's there in February, because I should be pregnant by then. And everybody and their collective group of knowledge is the reason why I'm able to have the opportunity to be pregnant. So I'm just so grateful for all of the incredible experts.
Well, we hope that you are fruitful and multiply. So thanks for those comments, and Nadia.
It's a bit of the same. It's amazing. I already know a few of our community members that are coming to meet Megan and I and the other speakers. So it's just, especially for us, because we work online now, right? Unlike you, Jeff, you still get to see patients, but we work online. So it's just an opportunity to see people in real life and to hear their stories and to learn from everyone, not just from the amazing experts that are speaking, but I've always said, my people with diabetes have been my greatest teachers. Anything that I can learn from my patients and that I can pass on to other people is just amazing.
Yeah, well, look, virtual is great and it connects us, but at the end of the day, I prefer in person, and I love what I do, and I like to shake and greet the person. And that's why we have medical charts behind us, although we're electronic now. I'm sure you have medical charts as well, but these charts are connected to real people that come into our office. So Megan, how can people find out more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. To learn more about our work, you can head over to thefastingmethod.com. Great free blog resource, information about our programs, and links to all of our social profiles.
And that's the same for you, Nadia?
That's right. I'm stuck to these guys.
Okay. Well, look, we're so looking forward to having you at the conference in February. And to our audience, if you want to hear more from Nadia and Megan, if you want to hear more from our speakers, please consider attending the conference in person and virtual. We prefer in person. And to find out more, you can visit lowcarbconferences.com. So that's all for now. Until next time, the two of you stay well, and thanks again.
Thanks, Jeff. See you soon.
Hi, Jeff.